read you an alphabet book today, and we did alphabet books at the beginning of the year, and maybe you remember them. They're books on that show you every page has a new letter, and then some things that begin with that letter. And this book is about Australian words that are distinct to the Aboriginal and Indigenous Australian culture. And because we're talking about dot painting today, all of these wonderful illustrations have been done in using dot painting. So we're going to look at two things: Australian words, but then also these wonderful pictures done in Australian dot painting style. I'm just going to show you this. We're not going to read every single thing in the book because it's a long book. You're going to see it's very long. Maybe we'll start part of it today and then we'll start part of it next week. I'm going to read you this first part, which tells you about the Australian Indigenous language and about the artist who did the dot paintings here. Before European people came to Australia, and European people is what they call people who do not have their background, their grandmas and great-grandmas and great-great-grandmas, and even far back directly from Australia. They came from places like England and European nations like France and Ireland, and also some places in the United States and all over the world, actually. All of those people who are not Indigenous Australian, people from Australia, they call European people. There are around 250 Aboriginal languages spoken across the continent of Australia. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are very proud of their language. There are still many people today who speak their language and who are passing it on to their children and grandchildren. Some Aboriginal language words are now used by all Australians and have become part of our national speech. Some of the words in this book come from a number of different Aboriginal languages. The pictures that accompany them have been painted by Bronwyn Bancroft. She's the artist, a famous Bundjalung woman artist who is very proud to share her cultural heritage with you. So let's think about her cultural heritage. So this is the A page. There's 2 pages of A. Well, let's look at what they have. They have arrows. They have adze. That's a kind of axe. They have an apple, just like we do. And they have an anthill. So an anthill is very different in Australia than what you're used to seeing here. You know when we looked at the anthill when we went on our walk at school when you were still there, and we took the top off the anthill and we looked to see what would happen, and the anthill was made out of soft sand, and it moved aside very quickly. The anthills in Australia are actually made by something called white ants. They're also called termite hills. And the termite hills are very hard. They're almost like rock. And they're many, many fantastic shapes, not just the shape of a hill, but they actually look like things that are growing up out of the desert. And these are formed because the ants don't just bring the sand out, but they chew on it a little bit. They masticate it so that it's almost like a wasp nest, and it almost sticks together like glue. And it's waterproof as well, because like when a wasp chews on the bark and creates a nest and it has a waxy coating on it to keep the rain out, so does the white ant hills in outback Australia. They're fantastic. Here's the B page, and here is bats and bandicoot. This is a bandicoot. And boomerangs. I have some boomerangs, and I'll talk to you about those maybe next week. And blossoms and bees. And on this page, the thing I'm going to talk to you about are bats. Now, bats are a thing in the world that always live together. They live in great, huge bunches. And they also carry a lot of disease. In fact, some people think that coronavirus may have started with a bat, but nobody's really sure about that. What they do know is that it started from some wild animal population somewhere. But bats are also amazing, and they also help pollinate all of the fruits and vegetables that we need to live on. And when I lived in Australia, nobody wanted them in their yards, so they would cut down the trees that they roosted in, because when bats roost, they roost all together upside down. And so the only trees that were left for them to live in were the trees in the cemetery, and it was fantastic. You would go out about 5 o'clock right before it would start to get dark, and streams of bats would come flying out overhead. It was extraordinary and beautiful. And it only happened at night. And then they would go out and they would eat all of the ripened fruit on the trees, and then they would come back and roost in their trees again till the next evening, actually. C. Oh, okay. C is for cloud and canoe and crocodile. And it's also for cockatoos. And there's white cockatoos and black cockatoos. And when I lived in Australia, you could look out your window just like you can here and see cardinals and see cockatoos. And cockatoos are funny birds. They used to get on the electrical wire that went past outside the gate where my swimming pool was. And we would sit in our swimming pool, and the cockatoos would be on the top of the wire like this. Then they would flip around underneath, and they'd flip back up on top, and they'd just do circles and circles and circles. They were lovely. They had big yellow crests on the top of their heads. I didn't ever see any wild black cockatoos, but white cockatoos were everywhere. The other thing we saw a lot of were saltwater crocs and freshwater crocs. We had freshwater crocs that during flood season would come to our swimming pools and swim in them. And we would go out to a lake called Lake Mundara and swim and canoe, and there would be freshwater crocodiles everywhere. But freshwater crocodiles are not aggressive, and they don't bother people. They don't eat people. Whereas saltwater crocodiles will eat you. If you come across one, it's probably the last thing you'll see before you die. But there weren't any of those in Mount Isa. Okay, we're on D. D is for dragonfly, dingo. Remember we talked about dingo yesterday? Yesterday. I'm going to talk about dingo again today. Duck, didgeridoo. That's for tomorrow. The didgeridoo. And dragon lizard. All right, I'm going to talk to you about dingo right now. So a dingo is a type of dog that used to be domestic. That means it used to be somebody's pet. And indigenous Australians they tamed them, and they brought them with them when they came to Australia thousands and thousands of years ago. But then those dogs became feral. That means they live in the wild now, and they're not anybody's pets. And they can be very, very fierce. And there's an island in Australia called Fraser Island, which I've been to. It's very beautiful. Where dingo, you have to be careful because dingoes will actually attack you there. And you have to be very careful. Dingoes are not friendly. And the thing is, they don't look wild like a lot of dogs. They look kind of tame, so you have to be careful if you see them. They're very fierce. They don't just make wombat stew. They'll make stew out of whatever they can kill and eat. And then E is the next. We have A, B, C, D, and E. Now we have emu, emu chick, and emu eggs. And we have echidna, and eel, and eagle. And I want to talk to you about echidna. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit later after this, the lesson video. One of the lesson videos, I'm going to talk to you about my friend Nana. Her name is Nana Joan Marshall. And Nana Joan Marshall is Indigenous Australian. And she spends a lot of time out bush. And one of her favorite things to eat, wait for it, is echidna. And because of the way the echidna's feet are, she would track them. And here's how you track them. While it looks like their feet move forward, if it looks like this, it's actually going backwards because they move like this and they move forward. So you have to walk backwards. What it looks like is backwards for their feet, and you can find the tree that they live in. And then she would kill them and eat them. She thought they were delicious. I mean, I guess we eat hamburgers, right? But it's not something I ever tried. Indigenous Australian people also eat kangaroo. They eat wombat. They eat crocodile. They eat a lot of things that I wouldn't think of eating, but we do eat pigs. That's what bacon is. We eat beef. That's what hamburgers in. And we eat turkey and chicken. We eat a lot of things like that. It's just how it is. I guess we're predators, right? A, B, C, D, E, F. We have flies. That's what my story is going to be. I actually have two stories today, flies and frogs. So here's frogs, here's flies, here's feather, here's fish, and there's flames. Unfortunately, this is a problem in a place like Australia because it's very, very dry there, except during the wet. And that's the story I'm going to tell you right now about the frogs. So when I lived there, we went to a national park called Budjamula. And in Budjamula Park, there's a wonderful campground where you can go and stay. And they have these big, like, shower bathroom, very clean actually, rooms that you would go to. But at nighttime, when all the lights went off, you couldn't take a step without stepping on all these wonderful frogs. They were everywhere, big green frogs. They weren't colorful like this. They were just green. And so the other part is, in the school I taught in Barkley Highway State School in Mount Isa, that's where I taught. You could look that up on Google, Barkley Highway State School. And so in Australia, the bathrooms are in separate blocks. You do everything outside. You eat your food outside. You do a lot of your classes outside. Like when we go to the gym and watch assemblies, we do all of our assemblies outside. We do everything outside. And so when you go to the bathroom, you walk out of the classroom, you go to the bathroom block, you use the bathroom and come back. But in the wet season, there was always frogs in the toilets. And the children didn't like to go to the bathroom if there were frogs in the toilets. And some children would forget to close the toilet lid so the frogs couldn't get in there. And so often in the wet, you'd hear the children screeching and running back to class because there were frogs in there and they were scared of them. And so the janitor would come along and scoop the frogs out so that they could go to the bathroom. It's quite clever, actually. All right, we're on F, G. We have lots of stories about Australia. Oh, all right, so we have guana. You saw this picture of the guanas in the snake dreaming picture that I showed in my lesson, or you will if you haven't seen it yet. Galahs. And galahs are actually pink and gray. I'm not sure why this galah is green and orange, but pink and gray is what color they are. Geckos. Everywhere there were geckos on the walls. And gum trees. So gum trees is what I'm going to talk to you about today, because when I was with Nana, she was my teacher's assistant, just like Miss Haley is now. We would go out bush at least once a week or once every 2 weeks, no less often than that. And she would make a fire and make Johnny cake, and she would always sit underneath a gum tree. She would not make the fire unless she was sitting under a gum tree first. And see these gum nuts, they would fall off the tree. And they're like acorns, they're the seeds of the gum trees, and they would grow. And gum trees grow all over Australia, and koalas eat gum tree leaves. They don't eat any other kind of leaf, just gum tree leaves. We're on H now. We have a husk, a honeycomb, a hawk, and home, and hill. So you can see how this looks like home. They've called it home because this is how Indigenous Australian people lived. They were very nomadic people, and they moved, and they liked to be outside. And yes, they do live in houses now, but even people who live in houses will often go what they call go bush. And many Indigenous Australians do not to this day live in houses. They live in the dry riverbeds because the sand holds the heat, and they sleep there at night. And then they come up out of the riverbeds and they go to work, and they go back down into the riverbeds at night. And not a lot of them do that, but plenty of them do that. Any riverbed you'll come across near a city in Australia, you'll find it that's dry with no water running in it except during the wet. You'll find Indigenous Australians with a fire making damper down in the riverbeds. That's where they sleep. I, insect, island. Oh, and then we'll go from I to J. Joey, that's a baby kangaroo that lives in its mom's pocket, and jellyfish. Now in Australia, there's a jellyfish called the Irukandji jellyfish. And the Irukandji jellyfish is only as big as the nail on your thumb. Not very big, that's pretty small. And then it has tentacles that come down from it. And the Irukandji jellyfish is deadly and tiny. And if it bites you, you could easily die from it. So we didn't do much scuba diving in Australia. We would dive in Fiji and New Zealand and lots of places around Moorea, lots of places around there, but we'd only dove a few times in Australia because of the Irukandji. And the Irukandji jellyfish are in Australian waters every single month that has an R in it. So the only months that they weren't in the water was May, June, July. And those times, that's summer for us, that's winter for Australia. So the water was cold then. Not as cold as it is here, but cold. Okay, we have K and then L. Kangaroos, koala, and kookaburra. 3 very, very typical animals that live only in Australia, although the kookaburra is related to a bird called the kingfisher that they have in lots of different places.